Welcome to my channel, The World of Science Fiction. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel.
The stench of unwashed bodies and industrial lubricant hung thick in the air of Alien 3's auction hall. Metal rafters creaked overhead, straining under the weight of decades of rust and neglect. Flickering blue-tinged lights cast harsh shadows across faces hardened by lives spent in the outer colonies. Mercenaries, traders, scavengers, all drawn to the promise of cheap labor and rare commodities. In the center of the circular pit, a metal cage stood on a raised platform. Inside, huddled against the far corner, was a girl. Not human, not entirely. Her skin was a mottled blue, like the depths of some ancient ocean, marred by bruises and dirt. A collar encircled her neck, pulsing with an angry red light that reflected in her large, wary eyes. Her knees were pulled tight to her chest, making herself as small as possible. The auctioneer, a man with a face like crumpled paper and eyes devoid of empathy, stepped onto the platform. His voice boomed through an antiquated amplification system that made his words crackle and hiss. "Next up, something special for you degenerates." He rapped his knuckles against the bars, causing the girl to flinch. "Feral hybrid. Attacked 3 owners. Untamed. You break it, it's yours." The crowd responded with jeers and raucous laughter. From somewhere in the back, a trader with a scarred face lobbed a bone, likely from whatever passed for food in this station's mess hall, at the cage. It clattered against the bars, falling to the floor inside. The reaction was instantaneous. The girl, the hybrid, lunged forward with shocking speed, snatching the bone from the floor. Her movements were fluid, almost graceful, despite the obvious malnourishment evident in her thin limbs. She hissed an inhuman sound that sent a visible ripple of unease through the crowd. Her teeth, slightly pointed at the canines, snapped at the air as if testing its resistance. The hall recoiled collectively, murmurs replacing laughter. "No bids?" The auctioneer's voice carried a note of irritation now. "Not even a collector?" Silence settled over the crowd like a heavy blanket. Faces that moments ago had been animated with cruel amusement now looked away, suddenly finding interest in the floor, the ceiling, anywhere but the cage and its occupant. Then from the shadows at the back of the hall, one man lifted his hand. Just once, a calm, deliberate gesture. He stood a head taller than most in the crowd, but it wasn't his height that made him noticeable. While others wore the gaudy armor and visible weaponry of those trying to intimidate, he was dressed in a simple jacket, worn at the elbows and stained with engine grease. His face was weathered, telling the story of someone who had seen too much of the universe too quickly. But his eyes, they remained quiet, observant, betraying nothing of his thoughts. Ryan Talon. The auctioneer's expression flickered between surprise and relief. "Sold," he muttered, eyeing Ryan with a mixture of curiosity and wariness. "Suit yourself." As the crowd dispersed, muttering about the foolishness of taking on a feral hybrid, Ryan remained still, watching the cage with those unreadable eyes. The girl met his gaze, her own filled with suspicion and something that might have been fear if it hadn't been buried beneath layers of defiance. 2 guards approached the cage, one fumbling with a set of electronic keys, while the other kept a shock baton raised. They were nervous. That much was obvious from their jerky movements and the sweat beading on their foreheads. "Don't know why anyone would want this one," the first guard muttered, finally activating the lock mechanism. The door slid open with a metallic groan. "Been nothing but trouble since they brought her in." His companion grunted in agreement, extending his baton toward the hybrid girl. "Come on, freak." The word had barely left his mouth when she moved. Later witnesses would disagree on exactly what happened next. Some swore the girl blurred, her movements too fast for the human eye to track. Others insisted she had been unnaturally still until the precise moment to strike. What no one disputed was the result. The guard's head slammed into the bars with a sickening crack, his body going limp. Before he hit the ground, she had already pivoted, disarming the second guard with a twist of her wrist that looked casual, but must have been excruciatingly painful judging by his scream. She flipped, a graceful, inhuman movement that defied the constraints of the small cage, landing behind the second guard as he stumbled backward. The stolen baton came alive in her hand, crackling with blue energy. A scream tore through the auction hall, and then silence fell, heavy and complete. The hybrid girl now stood in the middle of the room, the baton humming with lethal potential in her grip. Her chest heaved, not from exertion, but from the intensity of rage that emanated from her, like heat from a furnace. Her eyes, wide and fierce, darted from face to face, daring anyone to approach. Blood, not hers, spattered her blue skin, making her look like something from ancient nightmare tales. Ryan Talon didn't move. He didn't reach for a weapon, not that anyone could see one on him. He didn't call for help or backup. He simply watched her, his gaze steady, his posture relaxed. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and calm, cutting through the tension like a blade. "You don't have to fight anymore." 5 words. Simple. Director. But something in his tone, not pity, not fear, but recognition perhaps, made the girl freeze. For a heartbeat that stretched into eternity, no one in the auction hall breathed. The hybrid girl's knuckles whitened around the baton, her body coiled tight like a spring about to release. Then, unexpectedly, impossibly, she dropped the weapon. The baton clattered to the floor, its electric charge dissipating with a final spark. The sound echoed in the cavernous space, marking the transition from chaos to something undefined but undeniably different. She stepped down from the platform, slowly, deliberately. No chains bound her wrists now. No orders had been barked for her to follow. Yet she moved toward Ryan Talon with a cautious, predatory grace. She stopped beside him, her gaze fixed on the floor, shoulders tensed as if expecting a blow. Ryan gave a slight nod, acknowledging her choice without making a spectacle of it. Then he turned and walked toward the exit, the soles of his boots leaving faint impressions in the dust that coated the floor. She followed. No one said a word. The station corridors outside the auction hall buzzed with the usual frantic energy of Lion 3. Traders haggling over shipments of synthetic protein, maintenance droids weaving through the crowds, the occasional patrol of corporate security forces, maintaining the illusion of order. The air tasted of recycled oxygen and too many bodies packed into too little space, tinged with the metallic flavor of the filtration systems working overtime. As Ryan walked, people noticed him, or rather, they noticed his companion. Conversations faltered mid-sentence. Bodies shifted to create distance, some pressing themselves against walls to avoid proximity. A passage cleared before them like a wound healing in reverse. Overhead, security cameras whirred and pivoted, their mechanical eyes following the blue-skinned figure with cold electronic interest. Data being recorded, flagged, stored. A child, perhaps 7 or 8, peered out from behind his mother's legs, eyes widening at the sight of Kari. The moment her gaze flickered in his direction, he screamed, a sharp sound of pure terror, and bolted down a side corridor. His mother grabbed for him, missing, then shot Kari a look of pure venom before chasing after her son. "Hey!" A hoarse voice cut through the murmurs. A dock worker, filthy with a heavy scar bisecting his forehead, stepped forward suddenly and grabbed the girl's shoulder with calloused fingers. She whirled with predatory speed. There was no fear in her eyes, only the cold calculation of a hunter deciding where to strike first. Her muscles tensed, hand already forming into a weapon. Before she could attack, Ryan raised his hand slightly. "Not worth it," he said quietly. She froze mid-motion, her body caught between violence and restraint. The dock worker stood paralyzed, his eyes darting between her and Ryan. Confusion etched across his features. Not understanding why she had obeyed, why she hadn't already broken his arm, why this dangerous creature would listen to a single human's soft command. After a tense moment, the man backed away, releasing her shoulder as if suddenly aware he'd been holding live wire. They continued walking, without words, without looking back. The hybrid girl walked barefoot, her steps silent on the cold metal flooring. The collar was gone now, removed by Ryan with a portable interface device moments after they'd left the auction hall. The angry red ring it had left around her neck stood out in stark contrast to her blue skin. Her head remained low, eyes tracking movement from beneath the curtain of her tangled hair. Her shoulders remained taut, ready for attack from any angle. Ryan walked ahead, his pace unhurried but purposeful. Not once did he look back to confirm she was following. Not once did he reach for her arm to hurry her along or direct her path. He simply moved through the station as if he belonged nowhere and everywhere simultaneously, a ghost among the living. She followed, always exactly 3 steps behind, close enough to reach him if necessary, far enough to evade if betrayed. They passed shops where proprietors hurriedly activated security shutters at their approach. Past food stalls where vendors whispered warnings to each other. The word hybrid hissed like a curse. A woman carrying packages stumbled in her haste to avoid crossing their path, spilling her goods across the floor, but making no move to retrieve them until Ryan and Kari had passed. From a sidebar, a group of traders watched their progress, voices deliberately loud enough to carry. "You see that? Blue skin with no collar. 10 credits says she kills him before they reach the docks. You're with her?" Completely insane. They never domesticate. Not really. A burly man with Port Authority insignia on his shoulder leaned against the corridor wall, eyes glazed from synthetic stimulants. As Kari passed, he suddenly reached out, fingers grasping for her arm. "Hey, beautiful, how much did he pay for—" Ryan didn't stop walking, didn't draw a weapon, simply turned his head, a quarter turn, no more, and met the man's eyes. The port worker froze mid-sentence, hands suspended in the air inches from Kari's skin. Something in Ryan's gaze made him slowly withdraw his hand, backing flat against the wall without another word. Kari had tensed, coiled to strike. Blue fingers curled into lethal claws. But the attack never came. She watched Ryan, studied his reaction, then continued following, maintaining her precise distance. As they rounded the corner, a harsh whisper floated after them. "She'll slit your throat before she ever says thank you." No one said a word directly to them, not until they had passed well out of earshot. The station's main thoroughfare gave way to narrower corridors, maintenance tunnels, and finally the docking bay, a vast cavern of metal and shadow where ships of all sizes and states of repair waited like sleeping beasts. Ryan's vessel was neither the largest nor the most impressive, a freighter middle-aged by the look of its hull plating, patched in places where micro-meteor impacts or weapons fire had scored the surface. The name had been painted over, leaving only ghost letters, too faded to read. Whatever this ship had been, whatever it had been called, was history now. He approached the loading ramp, pressed his palm against a scanner that glowed briefly green, then stepped aside, a silent invitation. For the first time since leaving the auction hall, the girl hesitated. Her eyes darted from the ship to the bay exit, calculating distances, evaluating chances. Ryan didn't push, didn't cajole, simply waited, his expression neutral. After a long moment, she ascended the ramp, shoulders hunched as if expecting to pass through a force field or trigger some trap. When nothing happened, her steps grew slightly more confident, though the wariness never left her eyes. Ryan followed her inside, and the ramp closed behind them with a pneumatic hiss, sealing them off from the chaotic world of Alliance 3. Inside, the freighter was utilitarian at best. Bare metal walls showed the scars of hasty repairs and jury-rigged solutions. The lighting, dim and amber-tinted, cast long shadows across surfaces cluttered with tools and spare parts. The air smelled of engine oil, recycled oxygen, and the faint tang of solvent. The main living space was a single room that served multiple purposes, part galley, part workshop, part sleeping quarters. What few personal items existed were stowed efficiently in lockers welded to the walls. A small food preparation unit hummed in one corner, next to what looked like military-grade ration packs stacked in neat rows. Ryan moved to the unit, pressed several buttons, and waited as it whirred to life. "You should eat," he said without turning around, the first words he'd spoken since the auction hall. The girl remained near the entrance, eyes constantly moving, categorizing each object, each potential weapon, each possible exit. She didn't respond to his suggestion, but her gaze fixed briefly on the food unit, and her throat worked as she swallowed. When the unit chimed, Ryan removed a container of something steaming and placed it on the room's single table, along with a drinking pouch. He then moved to the far side of the room, giving her space. For several long moments, she didn't move. Then slowly she approached the table. She sniffed the air, once, twice like an animal testing for poison. Finally, hunger won out over caution. She fell upon the food with a ferocity that spoke of prolonged deprivation. No utensils. She used her hands, tearing at what appeared to be synthetic protein cubes and some kind of reconstituted vegetable matter. She ate with desperate efficiency, her eyes never leaving Ryan, even as her fingers scooped the last remnants from the container. He watched without comment, his expression neither disgusted nor pitying. When she finished, he indicated the drinking pouch with a slight nod. She snatched it up, punctured the seal with her teeth, and drained it in one continuous pull. "There's more if you want it," he said quietly. She didn't respond, but neither did she request additional food. Instead, her attention shifted to exploring the confines of the ship, though she never turned her back to him completely. As night cycle approached, indicated only by the dimming of the ship's already subdued lighting, Ryan unrolled a sleeping mat from one of the lockers. The blankets were oil-stained but clean, the pillow flat from years of use. "You can sleep there," he said, gesturing to a second mat he'd placed near the opposite wall, "or anywhere else you find comfortable." The girl's response was to retreat to the farthest corner of the room, where the shadows were deepest. There she crouched rather than sat, her back to the wall, eyes gleaming in the low light. At some point she had acquired a wrench from one of the toolkits scattered around the room. She held it now like a blade, her grip betraying familiarity with improvised weapons. As Ryan settled onto his mat, he reached into his pocket and removed a small access card, the master key to the ship's systems. With deliberate casualness, he placed it on the floor beside his makeshift bed, within easy reach should he need it in an emergency. Then he turned his back to her, pulled a blanket over his shoulder, and his breathing slowed almost immediately. The access card glinted in the dim light, its purpose unmistakable to anyone familiar with spacecraft. With it, she could open any door on the ship, could activate the engines, could release the emergency escape pod. Freedom was a single piece of plastic away. Her eyes fixed on it, calculating. Her muscles tensed, preparing to move silently across the floor. One quick grab, and she could be gone before he even woke. Minutes passed. Then an hour. The wrench remained tight in her grip, but she didn't move toward the key. She watched him all night. Every muscle in her body remained tense, ready to spring into action at the slightest provocation. The opportunity for escape lay exposed before her, deliberately offered. She didn't run. Could have. The ship's systems were accessible. The exit ramp could be manually released from the inside with that key. But she stayed, a sentinel in the shadows, waiting for something only she could define. Days passed. The freighter left LEN-3 behind, jumping to hyperspace with a shudder that rattled tools against the bulkheads. Their destination remained unspoken, and the girl, still unnamed, still mute, didn't ask. Life aboard the small vessel fell into a cautious rhythm. Ryan spent most of his time in the engine room, working on the hyperdrive that leaked coolant and power regulators that threatened to fail entirely. The girl followed him there each day, maintaining her distance but watching his every move with an intensity that missed nothing. She still didn't speak, didn't ask questions, but her eyes tracked the movement of his hands as he worked. On the fourth day, as Ryan balanced precariously on a narrow maintenance platform to reach an overhead coupling, the ship's gravity fluctuated without warning. The platform shifted beneath him, tilting dangerously. Tools scattered as he lost his footing, arms windmilling in the sudden weightlessness. He fell, a moment suspended in time, his body arcing toward the hard metal deck below. A blue hand shot out, impossibly fast. Fingers closed around his wrist with precision and strength that belied their slender appearance. She caught him mid-fall, her body absorbing the impact as gravity returned to normal, with a sickening lurch. For an instant, they remained frozen, her hand gripping his arm, their faces inches apart. Something passed between them in that moment of unexpected contact. Surprise in his eyes, something unreadable in hers. Then she released him and stepped back, as if burned by the touch. Her gaze dropped to the floor, shoulders hunched slightly. Ryan straightened, brushing off his clothes with movements that betrayed his own discomfort with the sudden intimacy. "Thanks," he said simply. The next day, she was working alongside him in the storage bay, organizing crates of spare parts. When he reached for a heavy container on the upper shelf, one of the mounting brackets suddenly gave way with a metallic snap. The container plummeted, its weight enough to crush bone. Ryan instinctively shifted to catch it on his shoulder, but his foot slipped on an oil patch. Something yanked him backward with surprising force. She had hooked her fingers into his belt, pulling him clear as the container crashed to the deck, spilling its contents across the floor. Her face remained expressionless, but her breathing was heavy, almost labored. The muscles in her arms were tense, still holding on to him. He slowly straightened, feeling the slight pressure of her fingers against his back. Not threatening, protective. "Thang," he said again, meeting her eyes. She didn't speak, but something had changed in her gaze. No longer the empty watchfulness of a predator assessing prey, but something more personal. Recognition, perhaps. Connection. She released his belt and knelt to gather the scattered parts. After a moment's hesitation, he joined her, their hands occasionally brushing as they worked side by side. She still slept in corners, still kept the wrench close at hand, still watched him through the night. But something had shifted, subtle as a change in air pressure before a storm. One evening, after a particularly long day, Ryan returned to the main cabin to find the water recycler's indicator light blinking amber. With tired eyes and heavy limbs, he pulled off his stained shirt and headed for the small hygiene cubicle. "Shower's yours after I'm done," he said over his shoulder, the same courtesy he'd offered each day. The cubicle door remained partially open, a habit from years of solo travel when emergencies demanded immediate response regardless of circumstance. He didn't hear her approach, but some instinct made him glance toward the door as he finished. She stood in the partial opening, watching him. Not his face, but his back. The network of scars that mapped his skin from shoulder blades to waist. Old plasma burns. The distinctive puckered circles of exit wounds. The thin white lines of blade cuts. Their eyes met briefly in the small mirror. For once, her expression was readable. Recognition. The understanding that comes only from shared pain. Ryan said nothing. He simply finished drying off, wrapped the towel around his waist, and stepped past her. "All yours," he said. "Water should be hot again by now." He dressed quickly, then busied himself with inventory. When he heard the shower activate, he glanced up briefly, then away. The door remained partially open, as it had for him. Through the gap, her silhouette was visible as she removed her tattered clothing. The shower's weak light illuminated her blue skin, revealing what the rags had hidden. Her back was a testament to cruelty. Brandings, corporate logos, and identification numbers marked her from shoulder to hip. Burn scars formed deliberate patterns that spoke of calculated pain. Surgical tags, small metal discs embedded beneath the skin, caught the light at her spine, wrists, and the base of her skull. Ryan didn't ask, didn't stare. Returned his attention to the supply list with a jaw clenched tight enough to ache. Later, while she was still in the shower, he placed a folded shirt and a pair of boots outside the cubicle door. The shirt was one of his, worn soft with age, patched at one elbow, and the boots were cargo pilot issue, adjustable to various foot sizes. He didn't comment when she emerged later wearing both, the shirt hanging to mid-thigh, the boots adjusted to their smallest setting, but still slightly too large. She didn't acknowledge the gift verbally, but her fingers smoothed over the fabric periodically, a gesture that seemed unconscious. That night, for the first time, she slept on the second mat rather than in a corner. The wrench remained in her hand, but her posture was marginally less tense. It was progress of a sort. The proximity alarm shrieked to life with no warning, jolting them both from sleep. Ryan was on his feet in an instant, moving toward the cockpit with practiced urgency. The girl followed, her movements equally swift despite being woken from what appeared to be the deepest sleep she'd managed since coming aboard. The cockpit displays flashed red, indicating an unauthorized docking procedure in progress. A ship had matched their velocity and was forcing a hard seal against the main airlock, a tactic favored by pirates and mercenaries throughout the outer systems. "Get back," Ryan ordered, the sharpness in his voice unfamiliar after days of measured tones. He reached beneath the pilot's console, removing a small pulse pistol, the first weapon she had seen him handle. She didn't obey. Instead, she moved to the airlock controls, fingers hovering over the emergency lockdown sequence. Before either could act, the inner door of the airlock hissed open, overridden by external systems more sophisticated than the freighter's outdated security protocols. 4 figures entered the main cabin. Their armor was mismatched but high quality, bearing the insignia of private military contractors, rather than any recognized security force. Each carried weapons that cost more than the entire freighter. Targeted disruptors designed to incapacitate without killing, valuable for those in the business of retrieval rather than elimination. Their leader stepped forward, helmet retracting to reveal a face scarred by what looked like chemical burns. His eyes found the hybrid girl immediately, his expression shifting from professional detachment to something like satisfaction. "There you are," he said, voice carrying the artificial smoothness of vocal reconstructive surgery. "Caused quite a stir on a Lion 3. Took some doing to track this junker through hyperspace." Ryan positioned himself slightly in front of the girl, the pulse pistol held low but ready. "What do you want?" he asked, though the answer was already clear. The mercenary leader smiled, the expression never reaching his eyes. She's tagged property, military hybrid, remote-controlled failsafe still active. He tapped his wrist display meaningfully. Give her back, or die. Behind Ryan, the girl stiffened. Her breathing changed, becoming shallow and rapid. The sound of her heart, audible to Ryan even at a distance, accelerated to a dangerous rhythm. If she resists, the mercenary continued, the collar detonates. The implant's still there, even if you remove the external device. Quite messy. Effective radius of about 3 meters. He glanced around the cabin with exaggerated concern. That's most of this ship, I'd wager. Ryan didn't move, didn't raise his weapon, didn't look back at the girl whose breathing had become almost imperceptible with fear or rage. It was impossible to tell which. Take me instead, he said quietly. Let her go. The mercenary's eyebrows rose slightly, the first genuine reaction he'd shown. Now that's unexpected. What's a hybrid to you? Especially this one. He nodded toward the girl. You know what she is, right? What she was designed for? Ryan's expression remained impassive. Doesn't matter. From behind him came a single word, spoken in a voice rough from disuse but unmistakably fierce. No. The girl moved, not away from the threat, but toward it. She slipped past Ryan's outstretched arm with a fluid grace that momentarily startled even the mercenaries. The nearest one raised his disruptor, but she was already inside his guard. One blow, open-handed but delivered with inhuman strength, crushed his reinforced chest plate, driving fragments of composite material into vulnerable flesh beneath. He collapsed without a sound, weapon clattering to the deck. She seized the disruptor, spun, and fired in one continuous motion. The second mercenary's shield activated a fraction of a second too late, the disruptor beam catching him at the edge of his protection. The force threw him against the bulkhead hard enough to dent the metal. The remaining two opened fire simultaneously, their shots precise despite the chaos. Ryan dove for cover behind the galley unit, returning fire with his pulse pistol. The girl moved like water, like shadow, like something not bound by normal physics. She used a storage locker as a springboard, launching herself over the leader's head to land behind the fourth mercenary. The shield she tore from his grasp became a weapon, its edge connecting with his helmet with enough force to shatter both. Through the firefight, Ryan noticed the leader accessing his wrist display again, fingers dancing across controls with practiced efficiency. The realization of what was happening hit him with physical force. Kari, he shouted, the name coming from nowhere, instinct rather than knowledge. The mercenary leader aimed his weapon at Ryan's exposed position, a smile twisting his scarred features. Goodbye, he said simply and fired. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion, though it couldn't have taken more than a second. The girl, Kari, turned at the sound of the name, saw the weapon aimed at Ryan, saw the leader's finger tightening on the trigger. She threw herself into the path of the disruptor beam without hesitation. The impact knocked her backward, her body absorbing energy meant to incapacitate someone twice her size. She hit the deck hard, limbs twitching from neural overload, but somehow maintained consciousness. Ryan fired 3 shots in rapid succession. The first missed. The second disabled the mercenary's shield. The third caught him in the shoulder, spinning him around but not dropping him. Then a sound cut through the chaos, a distinctive electronic beep. The skin at the base of Kari's neck began to glow from within, a pulsing red light visible through her blue flesh. The countdown had begun. 10, 9, 8. Ryan dropped his weapon, lunging toward the toolkit he kept bolted beneath the main table. His fingers closed around a microcutter and a magnetic probe designed for delicate electronic work. 7, 6. He reached Kayari's side, rolling her onto her stomach with more force than gentleness. The light beneath her skin pulsed faster now, the count accelerating as it detected tampering. 5, 4 dots. The microcutter sliced through her skin with surgical precision, revealing a complex device nestled against her spine. Blood, darker than human, almost purple, welled from the incision. 3 dots. Ryan inserted the magnetic probe, finding the control port through instinct and experience rather than knowledge of the specific device. 2 dots. Sparks erupted from the connection, singeing his fingers. Kari screamed, not in fear, but in rage. Her body arched, muscles seizing as the device sensed interference. "Don't touch it!" she snarled, the words torn from her throat. "Too late," Ryan replied, voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. One dot dot dot. With a final twist of the probe, he severed the device's connection to her nervous system. In one fluid motion, he extracted the implant, a small disc trailing wires and fluid, and hurled it across the cabin. The mercenary leader's eyes widened in belated understanding. Boom! The explosion was contained but violent, shredding the storage locker it landed near and filling the cabin with acrid smoke. The concussive force knocked both remaining mercenaries off their feet, giving Ryan precious seconds to drag Kari behind the relative safety of the galley unit. When the smoke cleared, the mercenary leader and his remaining subordinate were gone, retreated to their ship in the confusion. The docking clamps disengaged with a metallic shriek, and the freighter shuddered as the other vessel detached and accelerated away. Silence descended, broken only by the crackle of small electrical fires and the hiss of the fire suppression system activating automatically. Kari trembled beneath Ryan's hands, her breathing ragged, muscles spasming from the after effects of the disruptor and the implant removal. She was on her knees, head bowed, one hand pressed to the wound at the base of her neck. Slowly, she raised her head to look at Ryan. For the first time since he had purchased her freedom in that rust bucket auction hall, her eyes held something other than suspicion or wariness. Something that might, with time and care, become trust. They fled Alliance space, pushing the old freighter's hyperdrive beyond safety parameters. The damage regulator whined constantly now, a high-pitched keening that set teeth on edge and promised catastrophic failure if not addressed soon. Ryan plotted a course for the mining fields that clustered around a dwarf star at the edge of chartered space. Such places attracted little attention from authorities or mercenaries. The profit margins were too slim to interest the former, the pickings too meager to tempt the latter. Kari recovered from her injuries with inhuman speed. The wound at her neck closed within days, leaving only a pale scar to join the collection that mapped her history on her skin. The neural damage from the disruptor took longer to heal, manifesting as occasional tremors in her right hand and brief lapses in coordination. She still didn't speak much, but her silence had transformed from hostile to contemplative. She watched Ryan repair the shield generators damaged in the firefight, observing his techniques with focused attention. On the third day after their escape, she joined him without being asked, handing him tools before he reached for them, anticipating his needs with uncanny accuracy. By the fourth day, she was working alongside him, her slender blue fingers manipulating delicate components with precision that surpassed his own. They developed a language of nods and gestures, of shared glances that conveyed meaning without words. When Ryan struggled to reach a coupling deep within the shield matrix, Kari slipped her smaller arm into the narrow space without prompting, making the connection that his broader build couldn't manage. At night, they still maintained their separate sleeping areas, but the distance between the mats had decreased. Kari no longer clutched the wrench like a lifeline, though it remained within reach, a habit too ingrained to abandon completely. One evening, as they finished repairs on the starboard stabilizer, Ryan noticed Kari looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite interpret. She held his gaze for longer than usual before abruptly rising and disappearing into the galley area. When she returned, she carried 2 containers of reconstituted stew, the last of their supplies from Elian 3. She placed one before Ryan, along with a drinking pouch, then settled cross-legged on the deck with her own meal. It was such a simple gesture, bringing food to someone who hadn't asked, yet the significance of it hung in the air between them. This wasn't survival, wasn't obligation or fear. It was choice. Ryan accepted the food with a nod of thanks, and they ate in companionable silence, the constant hum of the engines providing a backdrop to the quiet clink of utensils against containers. The mining fields greeted them with indifference, a scattered collection of automated extraction platforms orbiting a star too small and too cold to have developed any natural satellites. The platforms changed ownership regularly as companies went bankrupt or were absorbed by larger entities, their original identifying markers painted over with new corporate logos, then painted over again. Ryan guided the freighter to a disused service dock attached to one of the larger platforms. The facility was technically operational but minimally staffed, perfect for those seeking to avoid notice. As they secured the ship and began the process of acquiring supplies, Ryan finally asked the question that had been hovering unspoken between them since the firefight. Do you remember your name? They were in the engine room, Kari kneeling beside the hyperdrive regulator, hands smeared with coolant as she replaced a cracked seal. She went still at the question, her body tensing in the way it did when memories surfaced unbidden. The silence stretched, filled only by the tick of cooling metal and the distant hum of the platform's generators. Kari, she said finally, her voice cracked and low, almost a whisper. My name is Kari. Ryan nodded, continuing the repair he was working on, as if the exchange had been nothing extraordinary, though they both knew it was. Nice to meet you, Kari, he said simply. A ghost of a smile touched her lips before vanishing, there and gone so quickly it might have been imagined. But she continued her work with steadier hands, the tremors momentarily forgotten. Days turned to weeks as they made the necessary repairs to the freighter. The platform offered limited resources but enough to make the ship space-worthy again. They traded labor for parts. Ryan's mechanical expertise and Kari's unexpected talent for structural engineering, earning them credit with the platform's skeletal maintenance crew. They developed a routine. Mornings spent on repairs, afternoons on acquiring supplies, evenings on planning their next destination. Kari spoke more frequently now, her voice gaining strength with use, though she remained economical with words, preferring direct statements to elaborate explanations. She began to ask questions about the ship, about the stars visible through the viewport, about the different species they encountered on the platform. Never about Ryan himself, never about his past or how he knew to remove the kind of implant she had carried. Those subjects remained as untouched as her own history. One afternoon, as they returned to the freighter with a haul of power cells, they were approached by a trader whose ship had docked on the opposite side of the platform. The woman, tall with radiation-darkened skin, blocked their path with practiced casualness, her smile bright and inviting, her eyes fixed on Kari with unmistakable interest. Heard there was a hybrid on station, she said, voice warm and friendly. Didn't believe it until now, she circled Kari slowly, examining her. Blue skin variant, rare these days. As she moved, the long coat she wore parted slightly, revealing what hung from her belt. A row of collars, different sizes and designs, but unmistakable in their purpose. Control devices, slave restraints, newer versions of what Kari had worn in the auction hall. The trader's fingers occasionally brushed against them as she spoke, an unconscious tell of familiarity. Her smile never wavered, never reached her eyes. Valuable in the right markets, and she added, gaze calculating beneath the friendly facade. Ryan stepped forward, positioning himself between the trader and Kari. Not for sale, he said flatly. The trader raised her hands, smile widening to show two perfect teeth. Just making conversation. Her gaze shifted to Kari, who had remained unnaturally still throughout the exchange. You're free now, aren't you, darling? No collar, no restraints. She jerked her chin toward Ryan. You don't owe him anything, you know. I'm headed to the central systems. One hand drifted to her belt, fingers drumming just above the row of collars. Could use someone with your capabilities. Pays good. Kari's expression remained unreadable, but something flickered in her eyes as she noticed the collars. Recognition of the trap beneath the friendly words. Think about it, the trader continued, smile fixed in place. My ship leaves tomorrow at cycle start. Berth 17. With that, she sauntered away, coat swinging closed to hide the tools of her true trade. Ryan said nothing as they continued to the freighter, nor did he mention the encounter as they stowed the power cells. If Kari noticed his unusual quiet, she gave no indication. That night, as they sat in the cockpit watching the slow dance of mining platforms around the dwarf star, Kari spoke unprompted. She wasn't wrong, she said, her voice soft but clear in the dimly lit space. About what I am. What I was designed for. Ryan's hands stilled on the navigation console he'd been recalibrating. Doesn't matter, he said, echoing his words from the confrontation with the mercenaries. It matters to some people. Kari's gaze remained fixed on the vista beyond the viewport. To most people. Ryan set down his tools, turning to face her fully. Not to me. Kari met his eyes then, her own reflecting the starlight like pools of liquid midnight. Why did you buy me? At the auction? It was the first direct question she had asked about their shared past, about the decision that had set their current path in motion. Ryan considered his answer carefully, knowing its importance. Everyone deserves a choice, he said finally. You didn't have one. Now you do. Kari absorbed this, her expression thoughtful. The trader offered me a choice too. Yes. Ryan returned to his work, not pushing, not demanding her decision either way. They worked in silence until the station's night cycle began, the external lights dimming to conserve power. As they prepared for sleep, Ryan noticed Kari standing near the viewport, staring out at the stars with an intensity that suggested internal conflict. He unrolled his sleeping mat, then hers, maintaining the routine they had established without comment. When he lay down, he heard her move across the cabin, expected to hear the familiar sound of her settling onto her own mat. Instead, she sat down beside him as he worked on a final adjustment to a circuit board salvaged from one of the mercenaries' damaged equipment. "I'm not staying because I owe you," she said abruptly, the words carrying the weight of long consideration. "I'm staying because I want to." Ryan nodded, acknowledging her choice with the same quiet respect he had shown her fear, her anger, her silence. "Okay," he said simply. No smile crossed his features. No grand declaration followed. But as he set aside the circuit board, his hand brushed against hers for a brief moment, the first intentional contact he had initiated since they met. Kari didn't pull away. In the artificial night of the mining platform, with the distant star casting shadows through the viewport, something shifted between them, fragile as a newly formed connection, strong as the bond forged in shared survival. Months later, their journey brought them to an outpost on the edge of the Middle Systems, a place where the boundaries between legal and illegal blurred, but where skilled mechanics could find steady work without too many questions asked. The freighter, now repaired, upgraded, and cautiously reliable, settled into a berth at the commercial docks without incident. They had developed a reputation of sorts, efficient, quiet, expensive, but worth the price for jobs that required discretion and technical expertise. Ryan worked beneath the belly of a luxury skimmer, replacing damaged gravitic stabilizers while the owner, a nervous merchant with too much money and too little sense, hovered nearby. Kari moved through the workshop they had established, organizing tools with methodical precision, occasionally handing Ryan exactly what he needed before he asked. From the corner of the shop, an older mechanic watched them with undisguised curiosity. He had been there when they arrived 3 weeks prior, had witnessed the gradual acceptance of the unusual pair by the outpost's pragmatic population. When the merchant finally departed, credits transferred and skimmer repaired, the mechanic approached, wiping greasy hands on a rag that had long ago lost its original color. "That the wild girl from Elian?" he asked Ryan, jerking his chin toward Kari, his voice pitched low but not low enough to escape her enhanced hearing. Ryan shrugged, continuing to clean and store his tools. "Don't know what you're talking about," he replied, though his slight tension betrayed awareness of potential danger in the question. Before the mechanic could press further, Kari stepped forward. She moved closer until she stood at Ryan's side, her presence deliberate, unafraid. With a casual grace that belied the significance of the gesture, her blue fingers brushed against his hand. Not grasping, not clinging, but simply connecting. Being present. The mechanic took an involuntary step backward, his eyes widening slightly at the unexpected intimacy between them. "Is that her, the one from the auction?" he managed, his voice hushed. Kari met his gaze with calm steadiness. No trace of the feral creature she had once been. "Not wild anymore," she said, her voice clear and steady. "Not around him." The mechanic stared for a long moment, then nodded once, a gesture of understanding, perhaps even respect, before turning away awkwardly, as if he'd witnessed something too personal for a stranger's eyes. He returned to his own workstation without another word. As the outpost day cycle began to wane, casting long shadows through the workshop's open doors, Ryan and Kari walked back to their ship together. Not predator and prey, not owner and possession, but two beings who had found in each other something neither had been looking for, but both had needed. A choice freely made, a connection freely offered. A wild thing, untamed, but choosing to stay.